Welcome to the Future of AI edition of the Parallax Intellectual Deep Web Extravaganza. With me is also my co-host Andrew Sweeney, also here Alexander Bard, Alexander Ebert, and Thomas Hamelryck. And we hope that Jim Rutt will join soon. Thank you guys for being here again. So there was one question and one thing popping up for me, which I want to start off this conversation with. And so I was wondering if we have an AI in the best case scenario that is deeply attuned to the deep structures of our psyche and consciousness, let's say in education, right? So we have an AI that's infinitely caring and knowing about our deep structures and helps us to learn the things we need to learn. And I was wondering if that doesn't take the spice of life and the struggle away of learning and existence itself. And I want to direct this question explicitly to Alex, because we talked a lot about flattening of certain systems like music, right? And art and literature. And I was wondering if such an AI that is so attuned to us is not kind of flattening the human existence and the human experience itself.
Andrew, I think you got children crying in the background. Is that an AI having an effect? We can all just mute ourselves when we're not talking. It goes for all of us. Thanks.
Yeah, I do hold that view. I pretty firmly believe that optimization is a process of dynamic flattening. It's the dialectic, and it's okay. It's not that I think it's a bad thing, but I do think it is a flattening thing. I think it is a collapse of the dynamism between I know how to do this, I don't know how to do this. It's a it's a collapse of the dynamism between attempt and mastery. And when we optimize, we reach these intermittent thresholds where these collapses, these equilibriums occur. And I think it's indisputable that we're heading toward, it is indisputable that we're heading toward a far more flat, homotypical, homologous world in terms of the kind of things we're consuming, art, but also I think in terms of the types of jobs we're doing, the qualitative aspects of life within the economic structure. I think that there may very well be more opportunities to experience different kinds of living that aren't so tethered to the economic experience. Possibly, right? So like, okay, the jobs are coming to do my thing. Now I just tinker and I do this for my money, but now I get to go live and hike or fucking whatever you want to do. But the extent to which that's the upside or the silver lining of the inevitable collapse of dynamism within the economic structure remains to be seen. But that collapse within the economic structure and in terms of our qualitative experience of work, I think is coming. I've already experienced it. So I've lost a lot of the problematization of recording a song, right? It used to be that you had to figure out how to play a snare. Now you don't. Now, what have I lost phenomenologically, and in the experience of struggle, as you say, right? Because struggle, necessity, produces the experience of invention, if not invention, right? Someone else has done it. It doesn't matter. I'm recreating the wheel, but why not? Right? Because that's a fun experience to recreate the wheel. I'm learning how to play a snare. There's millions of great drummers, but I'm learning. Now I don't have to. Now, in fact, I get to use the exact same snare as my neighbor, and it's the perfect sounding snare. And I know it's the perfect sounding snare because it's the product of a millennia of algorithmic research into the further and further refining its attunement to the desires of the listener. And so I'm seeing the general scope of mastery collapse, and that's okay. But when we talk about, like I was thinking about Mark Andresen's great article, and it's everything he's saying is true, but one thing he's not taking into consideration is labor quality. Like jobs are going to disappear and we'll get new jobs, but are those jobs qualitatively substantial? Do they require deep knowledge and techne, or are they simply superficial, more mechanistic jobs? So instead of thinking simply quantitatively, I think we have to think qualitatively. Anyway, that's my general answer. Yes, we're headed.
Alex Ebert is coming out as Martin Heidegger. This is straight out of Martin Heidegger. All of it, Ebert. The thing is that there's going to be a huge Heideggerian turn in philosophy. You're going to be very popular when you say these things. This is just the most obvious statement you could make when AI is happening. Okay, I beg to differ. I'm not going to go with the Heideggerian tie, but you're welcome to join it. It's obvious. It's going to happen in East Asia. It's going to happen in North America, everywhere. Everybody's going to go Heideggerian. The Russians are already Heideggerian. You're welcome, right? This is exactly what the old paradigm says to the new paradigm throughout history. Exactly this what you said. In Versailles, you bitched and complained the people in the streets of Paris are vulgar and dirty and whatever, but the people in the streets of Paris could read and write and count. Okay, so they made shortcuts to information. They made shortcuts to knowledge. I'm reading Michael Gibson's book, Paper Belt on Fire, and I know why we're becoming best friends though, because this is Peter Thiel's court philosopher in a way, I think, coming. But this is we all know the Heideggerian turn is absolutely obvious. I go exactly in the wrong direction. You know what? I've been a record producer 40 years. I never bothered to learn the snare. I bothered to learn to use the computer. And once I learned to use the computer, I was one of the guys who invented snares that were worse than the computer snares because they were more human that way, sounded more analog, etc. So yes, algorithms are around and they do a lot of the work, but they do the work simply because the building blocks are bigger. The best way to describe the revolution that's going on and the enormous benefits going to come out of AI is the fact that you don't program from scratch any longer. You have blocks you program with, and therefore you can program much more complex things. And therefore, for example, an Ethiopian peasant who can't even read and write can have his own homepage and sell his own groceries, in a market in Ethiopia. That revolution is massive, concerns billions of people. That's the good AI. Besides the fact that kids are going to have a guardian angel they can talk to at night, which is a lot better than the friends they presumably have today that they're rivals with. So I'd say I love Mark Andresen's piece. And he's saying what I saw lacking there was it didn't see all the scopes coming. I see so many other scopes, for example, for art. And if you just rethink art as the building blocks you're using as an artist are now bigger and more complex and more calculated, would you just go bigger then? You build bigger things, more complex things. Art can become more complex than it used to be, rather than the worship of the craftsman, because to me, that's just Martin Heidegger, old paradigm.
But let me ask again, Alexander. So if you have an educational AI that is so helpful that like no other teacher before, isn't that taking away the process of learning how to learn? I'm not hearing you.
I'm working with a company called Sana Labs, or I rather work with the guys who work there. We're already doing it now. The thing is that you do my AI that's educational. You can personify education and you can get educated your entire life. Gibson's book is about the death of academia. This book is the university killer. He's already started a fund called 1517, named after Martin Luther in Wittenberg, where he's going to kill the old paradigm. I'm totally on that crusade. I want to kill academia ruthlessly. I want to get rid of it entirely so that we can learn our entire lives and enjoy learning. Because the one thing we all love to do is to get up in the morning and learn more shit. We learn until we die. It's when we don't want to learn anything anymore, that's when we want to die. It's fundamental to libido. Everybody can have their own AI that follows them their entire life, and they can learn languages, they can learn about culture. You can walk through Rome and your AI tells you everything about Rome in the last 2,000 years. That is a totally different experience just than walking through the city after having read a book somewhere. I mean, the democratization of information, the massive spread of information, the accessibility of information is an enormous process. And at least anybody out there who's eager to learn can now learn just about anything. It's definitely on a par with the printing press. We just put 1,000 more volts into it, like the printing press 1,000 times over. You get where AI is going to go with us. We will be re-educated and educate ourselves our entire life. And we will know that the people who love to learn more are also going to be the heroes. They're going to be the masters. It's fundamental to being an ethnocrat, this eagerness to learn, is what I call will to intelligence, rather will to power. That's the most human thing of all. And everything we do, like Gibson writes in his book, everything we do is built on what science and technology and our knowledge achieves. All of civilization is built on the accumulation of, the processing of, and the improvement of information flows. That's what civilization is. I think it's fantastic.
So if I could just respond to that, I think that building these general, like, okay, if there's one general fact we can derive from historical instances of technological development, it's that technological developments change the human experience, right? They change the human experience. But based on this fundamental fact, just reading from notes I just wrote, we cannot induce static generalities because technological developments change the human experience. So this idea that, well, we had these fits of fear over technological moments and instantiations here, and here, so therefore, technology never actually changes anything in the way that we think it's going to. Those fears never pan out. Those generalities, like the machines, the fact that machines haven't taken over does not mean they will not take over. That's a dumb conclusion. We don't have any reason to induce that generality, right? Agreed?
Yes, I agree, but I never said what you just... You attached an opinion to me that I never had. Here's the point. Why I love Zoroaster and Zoroastrianism is that in the Gatha, Zoroaster is a clean ethicist, no morality at all. He writes that we have been nomadic. We've been nomadic since forever. Now we're creating something we can call a permanent settlement. Why don't we just give it a go because we've done the other thing?
Sure.
The reason I'm tired of people going back and recycling history is I'm not a traditionalist. I'm totally opposed that history repeats itself. Human beings are, of course, changing, and we're changing because our technological environment and context is changing. And at least 80% of change is directly ascribable to technology. About 20% of the changes in our human perception is ascribable to our interaction with technology changing because we change because of the technology. But we're never going to go back in history anyway. Technology is here to stay. And I'm embracing it for the very simple reason, not that it's better or good or anything, just because we've done the other story. We've done it over and over. We can go on to something new.
Right. So you embrace
I'm very Deleuzian, so to speak.
Yeah,
instead of I'm with Deleuze against Heidegger here very strongly, I would say.
So it's different. However, the interesting thing is, like in our previous talk, Tom and Andrew, I was talking about the result of the democratization of the creative tools, or the tools of creation, results in very, very clearly homogenization of the output of those tools. The more we democratize the process of creation, the more homogeneous those outputs.
No. This is just
this is not my opinion.
No. What happens when you democratize and everybody has access to something that apparently you and a certain elite should only have? When that happens, yes, spam is produced. There'll be more spam than ever to begin with. Then the dialectical process kicks in. In the beginning of the 18th century in Europe, every damn concubine who'd sucked the king's dick thought her diary was worthy of being published. Europe was drenched in spam. And then finally, this created the book publishing industry. And you wouldn't buy or read a book unless a certain book publishing company that you trusted, a brand, a curator, had given their sign on the book that said, this is a book worth reading. You wouldn't pick up anything else. And it's the same thing again. What we're seeing today, spam will explode and we hate it. We need the algorithms to get around it. I find that incredibly tiresome and very boring. It's sad news. Yeah, that's one of the problems. But AI and algorithm will therefore be even more needed to get through all the junk to get to what we're really interested in. And here's the great thing with humans. We know now for a fact, for example, from Spotify's work on this, we know now for a fact that people do not want the predictability of the same thing they enjoyed yesterday. They don't want the homogenization. They don't want the copy of the original. They really don't. Otherwise, Germany would dominate the music industry. They never did. Sweden did. We're more original. People like the novelty. They really do. And they like surprises, and they like randomness, and they like things thrown into their patterns that makes them uncomfortable and challenges them. And certainly they do if they're going to be netocrats. They will have to, because that's how you learn, right?
Well,
No, homogenization is not a given law of culture. There's no such law. You speaking of the paradigms and what we don't know yet, we don't know where this is going. I think we're all going to get tired and intensely tired of all the terrible Beatles songs we're hearing and all that, and therefore we have to go for something new, this novel.
Maybe I could jump in with a question and maybe bring Thomas in, because I'm wondering if you guys have you guys used these kind of programs in the creative process yet? Or because I'm just starting the university year and I've been told to make documents, and I made this document with this program, and it took me 5 minutes, and it's a kind of annoying document that would take an hour to write, which kind of freed me up to do other things. So I was kind of celebrating that. And apparently I heard we were talking with Cadell the other day, and Thomas said that teachers are actually marking their papers with ChatGPT already. So it just takes away all of this banal administrative tasks that you might have to do. So I was thinking that might bring back the craft of other things, if possible. That's a more optimistic point of view, but maybe Thomas, I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I think you were referring to a rather dystopian story that I was telling Cadell, because like the students, so the teachers make their exams with ChatGPT, and they send them to the students, and they do the exams. They solve the exams with ChatGPT, and they send them back to the teachers, who grade them using ChatGPT. So I've taken
that as a positive thing.
Just ChatGPT grading itself, right? And that also shows, academia is a huge problem, right? I mean, a lot of the exams and a lot of the ways that academia evaluates people has not taken something like ChatGPT into account. And I think a lot of people are questioning how will we test people? And that's related to the first question, right? So we are now faced with, I'm not so interested in this question about, is AI getting sentient and all of these things. I mean, basically ChatGPT is just a big statistical model. It's incredibly stupid. It doesn't even know there's a world out there. It's just very good at language, so people are very impressed with it. But what it does do is it gives us an incredible tool, just like book printing, right? What Alexander already referred to. So this is a huge technological progress, just like, type this, the Gutenberg printing process. It made a huge difference. And that's what ChatGPT is going to do. A lot of skills that were important before are not going to be so important anymore, because ChatGPT can do it. And that also means that new skills will develop. And what I see right now is people are figuring out what this thing can do, and they are trying to develop new skills and find out what are the new skills that are in demand. So their academia is, of course, running after the wagon very much, right? So it's a very slow moving vehicle.
Harvard, though, have already decided they don't take papers from students at all any longer. It's all oral. They've got oral with everything. So you can
oral. That's one thing you can do. You can kind of shield students from the internet during the exam, but that's creating artificial situations that will not be there in real life. So I think that the future lies in models that actually incorporate ChatGPT into teaching, into grading, and maybe not grading, but into. I already know people at university who are encouraging their students to use ChatGPT in specific ways. And that will need to happen, because anything else is just, we know that book printing is there, but we're going to test you on calligraphy. I mean, you can do that, but yeah. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Jim. Nice to meet you.
Hey, sorry for being late. I was head down writing code, and it just disappeared into the black hole. I suddenly looked up to holy, it's 28 after 2. So anyway, I'm here. Sorry.
What programming language?
This project is C#. C# and Open AI API. My script writing program that allows you to go from a very simple seed all the way to a full feature movie script through a whole bunch of steps, human, orchestration of human and open AI through a very complicated dance, and it actually now works pretty damn well. I gotta say, it's pretty amazing.
Fantastic. Okay, so now I think we can shift gears, because Alexander was alluding to a piece of a comment that Thomas did in response to the first episode that we did. And Thomas, you were kind of you were commenting on desire, prohibition, and ritual, and how new technologies kind of disrupt prohibition. And you had some ideas about what happened or what will happen. And so the question is, instead of reading the whole thing, could you elaborate a little bit on what you meant, and describe what you see for the future?
Yeah. So we have like three ingredients that come together, right? So we first archaic humans, so 300,000 years old. That archaic human has a certain anthropology, so basically a structural way of behaving that hasn't changed very much. So ancient humans, that's the first factor. The second factor is that we've interconnected everybody using a digital network, the internet. And that is actually something that's very relevant given the fundamentals of anthropology. And now there's the third element, and that is AI. And I'm not talking so much about AI as an intelligent agent that will start acting on its own, but it's something that sees everything and that can be used to set up rules and enforce them, because it sees everything. You can already see this in dictatorships. So let me elaborate a bit on this. So we have archaic human, we have the network, we have AI. So why is that such an incredible cocktail? Well, so first of all, for anthropology, we need to bring in Girard. So what are humans about? Why do humans do what they do? Why do they desire things? Well, Girard, a French-American thinker, pointed out that human desire is mimetic. So we don't really know what we want. We don't really have any individual desire. We look at other people, we see what they want, and then we want it too. That's what makes us different from animals. So we have mimetic desire. Animals do not have that. Now, obviously, if we want what other people want, that creates a lot of conflict. Because you compete over things, you compete over mates, you compete over resources, you compete over prestige, and so on and so on. So archaic humans needed mechanisms to get rid of this very dangerous thing, which is mimetic desire. So they had two mechanisms. And the first thing is prohibition. And that means under normal circumstances, we are going to regulate desire very, very strictly. That's the ordinary time. It's the time of prohibition. But that can lead to ossification. So, for example, okay, good sexuality is regulated, but at some point you need to find a mate. So sometimes you need to break times of prohibition, and you enter time of ritual. And time of ritual is where you do things. So first you break all the rules, because sometimes it's necessary in order to create new situations, like finding a mate. And the second thing that happens in ritual, that is scapegoating. So in order to get rid of all the aggression that has been building up in times of prohibition, you're going to say, well, at the end of the month, with full moon, we're going to designate some old woman living in the forest as a witch, and we're going to burn her. And we are going to project all our aggression onto that scapegoat, onto that woman, so we can pacify the community again. And that's religion. That's the structure of religion. Religion structures time in terms of times of prohibition, where there are strict rules for desire, and times of ritual, where you have transgression, where you have scapegoating. That's basically what it is. That's basically what religion is. Now, we've networked everybody together, and now everybody can look at each other. So it used to be very unusual that a poor peasant was in contact with somebody who was very rich. But now you can be Facebook friends with somebody who's 100 times richer than you. So that means that mimetic desire has exploded in the internet age. And the second thing is that scapegoating is exploding in the internet age. So we have all of these online groups, hate groups, that go after scapegoats. So that means that we have increasing prohibition and increasing scapegoating, because we have this increasing networking. And now we have the third element, AI. So this increased networking, or this increased network nature of the world, also leads to an increased demand for religion, for religious structure. We want prohibitions and we want ritual. At the same time, the internet and the modern developments, science and so on, they've abolished traditional religion. So there's this huge vacuum. People are screaming for prohibition. People are screaming for ritual. That means transgression, intoxication, scapegoating. And there is no real religious structure there to help them with it, because the internet is so new, religions don't know what to do with it. And now enter AI. And so AI makes it possible to impose prohibition on humans in a completely unparalleled way. And I think that is basically why we have all these letters, right? Oh, we have AI, we developed AI, we don't know what to do with it, we need regulations. What is this? This is basically the sorcerer apprentices, so our very smart nerds who developed all these machine learning algorithms. They are now screaming for prohibition. So who's in charge here, and who's going to use AI to create a structure of prohibition and to impose that on the world? And that the prohibition that we will impose on the world, or that will be imposed on the world, that can be a prohibition like you've never seen before, because AI potentially sees everything. And you can use AI to regulate anything. It works at a split second. You don't even need any secret police anymore. It's all done by computers. So that's basically, so I think I'm gonna leave it there. I can go on about it, but you have these three elements: archaic human structure. We've networked everybody, which is very problematic from an anthropological point of view. And now we have a way to really impose all kinds of religious structures on people. We can impose prohibitions on them. We can create rituals on them. We can use AI for scapegoating and so on. So what religious structure that is partly rooted in AI is going to be combined with the network and the archaic human? That's the question. That would be my 5 minutes.
Absolutely excellent, Thomas. The term for this is Sansocracy. It was invented by some Russian guy a few years ago. I think we give him credit in the book. We needed a term for what AI does when AI takes over and kills politics. The Chinese have a very clear vision of where this is going to go. So the only break they have on AI in China is that the Chinese Communist Party must have the last word on everything. So they already are regulating the way these apprentices are screaming for regulation in America and Europe. That's where it happened in China. The problem with China being way ahead of this game and having understood Sansocracy is going to happen is that they tied Sansocracy to Confucian, not the Marxist, the Confucian idea of ruling a society with one single guy at the top. They're back at Egypt. They're back at the idea with the tyrant at the top. That's how we are arguing, Jan Söderqvist and I. We must hurry up intensely to provide an alternative for free and open Sansocracy. And I don't think Europe or America is even in that game. That's exactly why I'm so damn interested in these new city-states and free state communities and these guys that go out there, come out of Western culture and go to Honduras and rent a fucking island for 75 years to build a Hong Kong built on crypto. Most of them, of course, will fail, but somewhere in there expect to find a pattern that we could present, that we could call the free and open Sansocracy. Because we have to invent it, otherwise the Chinese will win, and we will only mimetically copy them. That's what we'll do, because the Sansocracy will be the police state. That's exactly what we should worry about when it comes to AI.
Just a clarification, what would free and open Sansocracy be? Because I'm not sure if I get that idea. It seems contradictory to me.
Okay, we love the US Constitution. The US Constitution was brought by the French to the Americans. The French learned it from the Romans, and the Romans got it from the Persians. So if you go all the way back to antiquity, you have two empires that have two different ideas of how to run things in Western culture. The fundamental Western culture is the Middle East. It's Persia and Egypt. And Egypt went for the one tyrant because they had one river, etc., and built pyramids and believed in the afterlife. And Christianity is a remnant of that. But they did that. Their empire didn't last. The Bronze Age collapse was the collapse of Egypt, and Egypt never returned to form again. The Persians managed to run their empire 2,200 years in different variants. The last one was Safavids, which is actually a Muslim empire. But you know, they had three Zoroastrian and one Muslim empire had been Persian empires over 2,200 years. They've always been built on the idea of splitting power. So the idea is by splitting power in a dialectical triad, hence narratology, by splitting it into a power that's representing by logos, the symbolic power, by a power that's representing the mythos, which is the imaginary power, and by a power that represents real power, the real assets, the real things in a society, which is, of course, then the third real power. Okay, all paradigms return and then finally stabilize around such triads. And we know they are because the feudalist society that Putin wants to go back to was the nobility, the monarch, and the church. Exactly what Putin is trying to drag Russia at the moment. It will not work. Then we replaced that with the bourgeoisie and, you know, the corporate guys who created the industry. And we added to them the symbolic power, which is academia, that replaced the church. And then besides the real power and the symbolic power, we had the imaginary power, which is politics replaced the monarchies. Now, that means that Peter Thiel and these guys, they've understood that academia will die. Great. We've all understood that old industries died because tech is killing everything, right? What they don't get, but the Chinese get and we get, is that politics will die. You will certainly vote more for AI than a corrupt or manipulated politician. And you will do that very soon. And if you start voting for the AI, the question is, are there several AIs competing? Or is this just one AI? The Chinese have made their bet. They want to go for centralized technology. Go all the way up to Beijing controlling everything. We are working with decentralized technologies. So I'm totally with the crypto guys and all these guys right now, because we have to work on decentralizing technologies. And so far it looks good, because the real surprising thing coming out of Google and these guys over the last few months has been that it's actually real easy and cheap to do really advanced AI, which operates locally. That's exactly the sort of news right now that is good news that we didn't expect. So I'm on the side of decentralization. I'm going totally Deleuze in my philosophy. I know at the Chinese up there, we quickly have to present the alternative. And that's the free and open Sansocracy is at least 3 different powers at loggerheads with each other and not a tyrant.
So Jim, what's your take on this?
Yeah, this is clearly an interesting phase change that we're going to go through here. This is unprecedented in, I think, this particular phase change. But as you pointed out, Alexander, it is at least analogous to some changes in the past. And as you also pointed out, there is a general checks and balances, pluralistic approach, and then there's a unified approach, which are templates we've seen again and again and again in human history. As you also point out, the U.S. Constitution very explicitly based on the separation of powers and the theory that that balance, while it has its negatives, also has great positives compared to a single ramification. However, I think the time has now come to go a step further. And again, Alexander is pointing in that direction, which is to a radical subsidiarity, where power is delegated as far down as possible, but no further, to address each class of problems. So, for instance, questions, I like to use it because it's relatively trivial. The question of should alcoholic drinking be allowed on the streets of X? Under subsidiarity, the answer would be the neighborhood should decide. What difference does it make to you whether somebody else's neighborhood allows the drinking of alcohol or not? But at the other extreme, let's say greenhouse gases and global warming, because the climate doesn't care where these things are emitted from, those decisions need to be global, essentially. And this is where a nuanced, multi-layered set of decision making can indeed be upregulated quite substantially by AIs. It may not actually be needed at the bottom level, the Dunbar level, tribal level. One of the things that's nice about that is we've proven in 300,000 years of human history, you don't need any technology to govern at the Dunbar level, actually. But you get above, and in fact, it may actually be a good design parameter not to use technology, not even to use apps. It's funny, a lot of Game B people imagine that we'll wire up our little village with apps, for governance. I go, why do that? Why not just have a Saturday evening general meeting and hash shit out around the campfire, as humans always have? But at the other layers, AIs will help us make better decisions. Now, the bigger question, and I would love to hear everybody's answers to this, is that's a normative model. Subsidiarity with decisions made at the correct level. Can it win against the centralized? And if so, how? What's the competitive advantage of subsidiarity versus the what Alexander would call the Egyptian model, or very much in the Chinese model, where we'll all come down from the top? I have my own theories that searching the high-dimensional design space in parallel with lots of horizontal communications. And the AIs will be way better at horizontal communications than humans ever have, because AIs don't have a not invented here syndrome, which humans very famously have. Oh, Denmark has shown how to run an advanced economy with reasonably good egalitarian economics. Why doesn't the United States just pick that up? Well, because of goddamn Danes. They're no good, right? They're ham and cheese eating monkeys over there. We're going to do it the American way. But AIs don't care. They're willing to take learnings from anywhere. So hypothesis, the potential advantage of subsidiarity, distributed AI, etc., is parallel search of high-dimensional design space, which will be more efficient than in the aggregate in the results than a top-down design space search that you might get for in China. But I'd love to get other people's thoughts on that. And to Alexander's point, that somewhat to our surprise, it's clearly turning out that at least this class of AIs, we always ought to be careful. We're seeing a tremendous amount of semantic collapse around LLMs, large language models, and other closely related transformer-based technologies. Those are right now the cutting edge of AI, but they are not the only kinds of AI that will be emerging and may end up being the major control systems for our world. But at least it is true that LLMs are turning out to be not very difficult, not very expensive, and that there's absolutely no reason at all that they can propagate out and be easily modified for specific purposes. So it turns out the realities of the technology are a relatively good fit for a subsidiarity-oriented, self-organizing structure for a society. But we still have to have the question of, will we win if we go that route?
I use an example to my students. I just say it's pretty obvious by now that a virus leaked out of a laboratory in Wuhan, China, and it took 7 months before somebody told Xi Jinping because they were terrified of telling him. The result was 30 million people dead around the world. That's the problem. I don't moralize against tyranny. I just say tyranny is stupid and it can't last. Tyranny is not sustainable, and all the worst horrors in human history have been tyrannies. So my argument against tyranny is precisely strong. That's why I work with Russians. I did a big Russian television interview yesterday, leading opposition channel, because I've been working on this for a long time, what the alternative would be to these tyrannies and why these tyrannies always fail and why they cause so much damage. I'm totally with Jim on this one. The thing is that the productivity gains from AI will happen in the corporate sector because it's competitive, at least the competitive part of the corporate sector. Digitalization will just run on, and tech will come with a new wave around 2025, and tech will eat everything. The problem, though, is that we really could use AIs in government and in bureaucracies, and the bureaucracies that come with government, because they're not competitive. They're usually monopolies. The problem is that they will put their heels in and do everything they can to tell us that we need them. Big government is back. Why? Big government is back because the politicians want to save their asses, and they want to save their friends' asses with the bureaucrats. I think it sounds weird. It sounds like it's a rightist thing, but I'm a Marxist when I say that a big tax revolt is needed. Because if you pull the rug from governments and bureaucracies, so they can't go the Chinese way, they don't have the resources to go the Chinese way. And you basically say, AI can do that. We don't need you. Pull the rug from underneath. Right? If you drastically lower the taxes rather than giving everybody, citizen salary, you just give people lower taxes. They usually go off and do great things with them anyway. You give them more resources. I think the key is that decentralization, for that to happen, we have to have a major international tax revolt in the West. And that's the answer we should have as the Chinese. Get rid of big government. Have lots of great local governments, yeah.
But I have to ask. I don't see the relationship between that and the question that Thomas posed. So how is prohibition and ritual organized via AI? Because obviously
so when the internet was created, right, there was this beautiful story. Oh, we're going to connect everybody. It's going to be fantastic, and it was a complete good news story, right? I mean, nobody thought that just interconnecting everybody that would be leading to an enormous amount of problem. That came as a big surprise. Now, when I hear Jim, I'm wondering, like, where are the considerations about the let's say the less benign aspects. So where is your, I'm wondering about what is your idea of how humans are structured and how they will interact with AI, because it's a very good news story that I hear from you. So AI is going to lead to collaborations and new ways of living and this and that. But right now, it's basically just the chaos out there. And isn't it kind of interesting to kind of consider what the enormous, or what the clash is going to be of these ancient humans that have already been thrown into the internet, and now we have an AI on top of that? Isn't it kind of interesting to kind of see, like, well, what is out there before we start dreaming about how AI is going to create a great future? Or is that an unpredictable way of thinking or working? So I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, truthfully, I think it's fait accompli. It's there, it's cheap, it's out. Anyone can do it. There's no stopping it. And so all we can do is try to use it for the good and try to find out what are the bad scenarios. So, for instance, Daniel Dennett, the philosopher, threw out an idea. I'm not sure I endorse it, but I think it's worth thinking about, is that he proposed making he called it counterfeiting, because he liked the term. Counterfeiting a human should be a very serious felony on the equivalent of attempted murder or something like that, as an example of how we might socially rule out certain bad cases, at least by law followers. Of course, we also have to understand there will also always be law breakers. So it's like any other technology. Think of the automobile, right? When it first came out, there was no rules about which side of the road to run on, and we quickly had rules about what side of the road, and very soon thereafter we got speed limits. Nonetheless, how many people have been killed in the United States alone by automobiles in the last 100 years? I think the number is something on the order of 1.5 million. So you have the good and you have the bad, and AI is no different than any other, at least AI at the current level. And this is what we talked about last time, that yes, the superintelligence issue, the Yudkowsky Bostrom paperclip maximizer, is a risk out there a ways. How far it's out, people can argue about. But the current play of AI, particularly these large language models, I can see some problems with them, but I can also see lots of benefits, and we're just going to have to sort it out. I mean, there's no going back, basically, at this point, and there's so many obvious positives, and while there are also some negatives, they're not as obvious. So my sense is just roll with it, do the best we can.
I can give another.
Yeah, okay, but again,
I can give it, Thomas. I can give you another.
Like a nice positive attitude, and I agree with that. It's out there, and we need to use it for the good. I mean, I agree with all of that, but I mean, is it a bit bland?
Thomas,
that's okay. It's okay. So the internet's the same way. You say some bad things came around the internet, some good things too. The six of us would never have connected if it wasn't for the internet. I suspect that the net effect on humanity has probably been a net positive from the internet, and probably a large net positive. And we are tool users, we are tool makers, and that's what we do. And so, at least at this round of AI, I'm willing to roll the dice, see what happens, and assume that if we're smart and if we're diligent and if we can improve our governance, which is a big question, particularly in the United States where it's very broken, no reason why we shouldn't see some more net win than net negative from this next round.
But nobody said otherwise.
No, wait, Thomas, can I just give you an answer to your question in that case?
Yeah.
If you have to choose between just one single system for prohibition or ritual, or if there are 100 different variations of prohibition or ritual and how you deal with prohibition, you can actually choose between. Which one would you prefer?
Well, I would like to go back to something that Ebert said last time, and he was basically saying that we have some kind of space where you will have AI enforcing some kind of globalized prohibition, which we're already moving towards. I mean, try to even write a slightly provoking restaurant review on online, right? I mean, you get banned for hate speech. So this stuff is everywhere. Now it's being enforced by AI. And so what Ebert pointed out is that he saw some kind of battle going on between you would have a personalized AI assistant who would help you to survive in an environment where all kinds of other AIs are trying to regulate your behavior. So it would be a very dynamic situation where you would have to basically navigate a very complex space aided by digital assistants, by AI assistants. So kind of like how shall I put it, like an almost state of constant conflict. And I think that there is no really any. We are already moving into a space where prohibition is almost entirely global. And the only thing you can do is to create bubbles where you're isolated from this global state of prohibition, where you isolate yourself from that, and where you can do things that are being done in private, because that will become increasingly difficult, and that's already the case. So I think that it's these things that that are really interesting to discuss. I mean, saying things like, "Oh, AI has bad sides and good sides." Well, yes, everybody says that all the time. It's not very interesting, right? Or yes, now we have a snare drum that comes out of a can, and nobody knows how to play the snare drum anymore. Yes, that's all true, but it's a bit not really where the beef is, right? I mean,
well, maybe in terms of deep motivation, like what about this problem of the easy button? You know, or is it going to become another kind of obesity, right? It's just everything becomes so easy that people just become incredibly stupid, or not. You know, I mean,
what about the inverted techne pyramid? Like, for instance, like the inverted pyramid of sort of knowledge and know-how with regard to these technologies. Is that a concern for everyone? For instance, you know, everyone learns how to build a fire, but nobody knows how to build a fucking HVAC system. And once we become dependent on these systems and lose the techne and know-how to build those systems, and there's suddenly a solar flare. I mean, this is a typical argument. And if this is boring, I can definitely go on to sort of explain Thomas's question in other ways in terms of Sansocracy and interfacing with AI. But yeah, anyway,
I think you're still with the Heideggerian mode, and you've expressed it already. But I think what you're going into that I'm certainly interested in, and Thomas alludes to that too, is that we shouldn't mix up what the old institutions. Again, Gibson and I agree here. We shouldn't mix up what the old institutions are trying to tame the internet to their favors, right? The old institutions are around. Politics is still around, right? Old industry is still around. Academia is still around. They're trying to do everything they can. They invented woke for that reason for 10 years ago, to do like a collective guilt trip. Well, that's a prohibition, if anything, right? So they're investing their resources in the corruption of the algorithms, in the manipulation of the algorithms. And what's most important when I talk to Chinese people and Russians today, in the conformation of the algorithm. And that is probably what Thomas was adhering to, which is the horror, is that for every year, it gets narrower, what you can do, and the prohibition gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's certainly the worst form of marriage between the old institutions and the new technologies I could imagine. But it's already happening in Russia and China. It could certainly happen with us too. And a lot of these politicians are out there are all too happy to sign documents actually that conform society. This conformation is even worse than manipulation and corruption.
And I would like to come back to these letters that are appearing everywhere, right? You should interpret these letters, and I think Foucault would really love this. This is basically people asking, we've created a machine and we have no idea how to use it. Who wants to take power here? That's really what's out there now. With all these letters of concern, there's genuine concern, of course, but there's also an aspect of it is we've written this letter, so don't hold us responsible. And please, can somebody step up and use the technology that we have developed to run the world? And that's very much out there. And this is going to be very, very interesting. And the first thing that's going to happen is that we already have enormous amount of basically telling people what they can say and what they cannot say. And this was all done by people in poor countries reading texts now, right? So you had to pay people and you had the human in the loop. Now that's all done by AI. AI can censor you on a split second, on a scale that we haven't seen before. And this is going to hit us like a tsunami soon. And of course, there's the good news story, healthcare and medicine and stuff like that. We'll see enormous benefits from AI. But I think we need to kind of start discussing the enormous possibilities of censorship and control that are now being let loose. And I'm not saying it's inevitable. I'm not saying that an AI dictatorship is unavoidable. But I think we'd better start discussing this. And I'm not talking about an AI in charge, right? AI is incredibly stupid. I mean, these large language models are just statistical models. They're incredibly dumb. There is no consciousness in there. But they are very, very powerful tools in the hands of smart people.
But so long as there's this very strict sort of prohibition mediated by AI, isn't that a return to religion? So long as you have a fucking holiday from it, a purge, like the movie The Purge, where you have 12 hours where you can go murder people and then get back to the unpliant legal structure.
Yeah, but this is the enormous problem, right? So religion was kind of a system that consisted of two parts, prohibition and ritual, and they were attuned to each other. If you create something that is only prohibition, you're going to have chaos. Because you design the prohibition and you are not thinking about the ritual that you are also designing. If you create a prohibition, a structure of prohibition, you automatically create a ritual. And that ritual, you will not know what you're creating if you only focus on the prohibition. That's the problem. You will create dictatorial systems, or even systems that look very benign and look, we're trying to do good, but you're actually designing a prohibition that pushes people into states of chaotic ritual that are extremely chaotic. That is the problem, because a lot of people are designing worlds they seem to be based on a human nature that is very optimistic, reasonable people, rational people who don't need religion, and so on and so on. And they seem to design worlds for those kind of people that do not exist. That is the problem.
Take communist China today. Here's where Thomas' point is you're so point on, Thomas, here. Communist China are dreaming about a Confucian society with eternal happiness that does prohibition intensely and leaves no room for ritual because the Communist Party are terrified of the ritual. That's exactly what Communist China is at today. What they're doing in the process, according to Girard, and I agree, is that they're obviously creating a culture pressure cooker. And what they do with the pressure cooker is that they let a lot of Chinese people leave. 100,000 Hong Kong Chinese have resettled into the UK in the last 6 months. Thanks, because these guys just say Brexit. Brexit will look great because Chinese people are moving to the UK. But Hong Kong is then being filled by the people who think Hong Kong is better than mainland China. The stream is going one way, it's going out of China, and millions of people are leaving. Why? Because they can't stand the idea of living in a world with only prohibition and no ritual. That's what tyranny is, right? That's what the tyrant wants. And then what they're doing, of course, then when the pressure gets going as well, besides having a lot of people leave the country, same problem in Iran, same problem in Russia. I meet all these Russians, millions are leaving Russia right now. Okay, they're getting out because they can't live in a society with only prohibition or ritual. So the pattern is there already. They're creating these pressure cookers. What they then do, Xi Jinping, is that the guys loyal to him, they're corrupt and stay with him. And then he goes after other guys in the Chinese party. And then, of course, he arranges the scapegoat mechanism. That's exactly what he's doing. That local communist boss over there, yeah, he's corrupt. If you only get rid of him, corruption will be gone, and the Communist Party will again be Confucian and fantastic and everything. And they go after it. It's exactly what they're practicing. And everybody but Xi Jinping is terrified.
But the scapegoat mechanism is ritual.
It is I would say it's replacing ritual when it's completely arranged, right? Okay, if you know that the guy at the top is completely corrupt, like Putin in Russia, and you then just take a local guy and then puts him out there and says he's the betrayer, go and kill him. Yeah, it might work a few times, but after a while you get it. No, wait a second. That's not the real scapegoat. You got to go for another scapegoat. What Putin is therefore doing in Russia right now, this is the next thing that's going to happen in Russia, is that the Duma are going to declare homosexuality a psychiatric disease. Perfect to create scapegoats from the population itself. That's Putin's next game. This is what Thomas means with prohibition without ritual. So we have these really shaky systems in Russia, in China, and Iran. They look terrible, right? But here's the problem. Our politicians who realize they're done. AI is going to get rid of them, and hopefully with the free and open AI, whatever. But the politicians in Europe and America, they're all too willing to import precisely the police state technologies from China that China have developed and are now selling to Russia and Iran, and have them in Europe and America too. And that's I think Thomas again is spot on in the sense that there's a conformation of what we can do into less and less and less. And all we can do in this is create these little free spaces somewhere that are tantric realms or whatever that the government cannot control. I think we're heading there already.
Now, isn't there another alternative? It's interesting. You always want to bring it back to the religious paradigm, but let's consider the turn away from religion in the Enlightenment. That essentially we no longer had a society based on prohibition. Pretty much all human societies prior to the Enlightenment were based on prohibition, and I'll take you guys' word for it. Also, ritual, though. I'm not sure that I'm not enough of a scholar of that of religion to know if there was always exceptions to prohibition in the form of formal ritual. I think of Catholic ritual. I don't see too much fucking in the aisles there.
Jim, I'll just interrupt you. That's the difference between Sutra and Tantra in Eastern cultures.
Right.
China, India, Persia had the Sutra. The Tantra is the ritual. So they always had a place.
Catholics have carnival, right?
Yeah,
that's
the closest.
Rio de Janeiro. Carnival is a typical Catholic thing. Protestants don't do that. They don't have carnival.
Yeah, good point. And Southern Catholics, not so much Northern German Catholic, but even more so the goddamn Protestants. Right? They're like Catholic squared in that regard. But we did, at least in theory, step away from all that with the Enlightenment and said, liberalism is the answer, liberty. And everyone seems on the right and the left today seems to want to throw universal human liberalism in the trash. Maybe isn't that the right road to stick to, because it's very compatible with this vision of subsidiarity and omni-point governance, etc. And so why do we even want to go to a new form of prohibition and ritual when instead we could stick with the Enlightenment vision of liberty?
Well, I mean, we had Nazi Germany, right? I mean, it was still pretty bad, right? Enlightenment and this very rational way of thinking.
We had like the car crash of the 20th century. How can you be so like, oh, we had the Enlightenment, that was really great? I mean, the whole point is that you can't just say like people are not religious. I mean, people are religious, and if you take away their religion, they'll find one themselves, and that means that they will demand prohibition. They will demand to be told what to do, and they're going to scapegoat those who do not follow the rules. That's what happened in the 20th century. If you take religion away and you just throw people in a vacuum, they will go back to archaic patterns of unstructured religion, and it means scapegoating. In the Second World War on an industrial scale. That's what we're going to go to if people just if the religious impulse of humans is not somehow turned into something that is, how shall I put it, constructive, or something that leads to that avoids these extremes of ossification from extreme prohibition that then always erupts in chaotic scapegoating. If you so Alexander was right, he calls it a pressure cooker, right? That's exactly what it is. Then you end up with societies that are full of rules and everybody's rational and it works until it doesn't work, until it explodes into an enormous amount of violence. You have to balance prohibition and ritual, and that's why the West has always been particularly, or in the best of its times, has been particularly vivid because it allowed ritual. But it didn't try to put rules all over the place. It always had it always had a fringe. And especially in America, that's the case. America is a society with a lot of rules, but it has always highly cherished experimentation, the unconventional, the right of people to organize their own ways of living. And that's exactly what we're talking about. There's one fundamental thing about the Anglosphere as compared to the rest of Europe and much of the rest of the world. It has to do with the logic of law. In the Anglosphere, that which is not prohibited is allowed. right? So even though we do have fuck all too many laws in the United States and the UK and Australia and Canada today, that which is not regulated is totally free, at least in theory, right? Unlike the civil law of Europe, where more or less the opposite is true, that only that which is allowed is permitted. And in the same way in civil law countries, the presumption of innocence is nowhere near as strong as it is in the common law.
Jim, I've got to stop you here. You sound like a fucking American racist right now. Listen, that is such a simplification. It doesn't work like that at all. Scandinavia is a huge exception from what we just pointed. Let's go back instead to liberalism and its problems. Okay, let's do that. If liberalism tries to be secular and doesn't admit that it can be religious, it leaves the religion door open. I think that's what Thomas is getting at. The problem then was when liberalism took the place of religion was that it resulted in atomism, narcissism, and hedonism massively. What we did was that we drenched people in a consumer society and exploited this planet until exhaustion and created consumer societies so we could keep down mimetic rivalry and mimetic desire to minimum. So everybody got something that seemed that they had what the idols had, right? That's what we did in the 20th century, and it wouldn't last any longer. It won't work. We'll have a little chance now to save your darling if you want to, because a war is going on in Europe, where the Ukrainians decided to use their flag and invent their nationality or reinvent it to then defend liberal democracy against feudalism. So you have a war right now with pro-enlightenment, which is Ukraine, against pre-enlightenment, which is Russia. That's exactly the conflict. And we are on fire in Europe because it appears there are people who are willing to live and die for liberal democracy. And we're kind of shocked. And we're getting out of the decadence of it. So there is a massive reappreciation of liberal democracy. But unfortunately, I think it's only going to last for a few years and then probably going to back to the problem. And the problem is that liberalism doesn't play into the needs of human beings. Something is lacking. So it must be, the name for that is religion. And I'm much more serious and honest with people in discussion when I said, everything is religion, exactly that which pretends not to be religion is probably the least interesting or the most dangerous. So I'd say America has its churches and mosques and whatever today, and we need those institutions inside as well, because we need to have this game where prohibition ritual get their places, the dialectic between the prohibition ritual, because otherwise you either create a tyranny that eventually becomes a pressure cooker and explodes and becomes an anarchy. That's historically what happens. Or just let everything loose into completely hedonistic, free for all, everybody's fighting with each other, free for all, which is another form of anarchy. So you have two ditches, and you need to be in the middle of those two. And historically, we call that religion is the regulation of prohibition ritual. Where Thomas and I agree is the Buddhist and Zoroastrian is that we need to import from the East is that the tantric realm must exist in the middle of our society. Otherwise, we're just going to buy into the Chinese dream right away and create another form of like a Christian tyranny, whatever. It won't work.
Now, of course, in the United States, we have a very interesting model where it's one of the most religious major countries on earth, at least of the industrialized ones, and yet totally heterogeneous. Everything from Hindus to Buddhists to fundamentalist crackpots to very liberal Unitarians and Episcopalians, etc. And so there's room for everybody to have a religion, and yet the religion is not and if you want to personally say, I will not eat pork, or I will not dance, or I will not wear a skirt above my knee, you're perfectly allowed to do that within, say, an American pluralistic religious tradition. Does not require a system-wide prohibition nor system-wide ritual. And isn't that more compatible with the subsidiarity?
You have a ban on paganism. You have a complete ban on the whole world as a ban on archaic paganism. And people don't even know that. If in America you want to bring back human sacrifice, which is the oldest religious structure, which is basically the basis of humanization and the basis of religion itself, you are not allowed to do that. So there is a huge, huge prohibition. And it seems that people are just not even aware that it's there, which I find quite interesting. I'm not saying to bring back human sacrifice. I mean, let me be clear, right?
That's
but
not exactly
you should
true.
know
that. Sorry, I would like to interject here for a second.
So this is a deep religious stance that you have in America. You're deeply, deeply religious about human sacrifice, scapegoating, and killing. Killing scapegoats is fundamentally wrong. Although that's changing. if you look at America with all the shootings and all the violence, it's slowly creeping back. That is religion. Religion goes much, much more deeper than I think many people realize.
But also,
let me just give me a second. So, I mean, we're all kind of familiar with adult developmental theories up to a point, Keegan and Wilber and all these kinds of things. And so he posed that, these scientists pose that there are structures of consciousness, that there are levels, and that the enlightenment level is a relatively new one, and that beneath is all this strata of archaic and religious structures that we can't let go. They will always inform our behavior. And I think that is what Gerard is alluding to, and Thomas, that independently of what you're doing, these deep structures of consciousness will always find their way into what we're doing.
And I'm thinking that there's a way in which the AI question is a theological one, right? Because we're always talking about creating a God. And so even if we're trying to avoid religion, we're saturated in it so deeply that the most atheistic type, like Jim, is without even trying, is going to spout a bunch of religion no matter what. I'm sorry, Jim, you're wonderful, but it seems that I totally agree with that.
If you want to call religion that which rejects supernatural nonsense, then sure, I suppose I'm religious. But my form of anti-religion is quite specific against the supernatural.
That we agree on. I'm a Zoroastrian. Zoroastrians have
Yeah.
Zoroastrians have been opposed to the supernatural for 3,700 years. You're welcome to join the club.
Yeah.
You are religious, Jim. You are. Your belief in the community you're talking about, these are religious faith things, and they're beautiful. You're religious.
And so, I'm happy to align myself with things like, I know you guys don't like this, the John Vervaeke's religion that is not a religion, which is to replace the singing together, the dancing together, the probably some decorum rules about who you can have sex with when, which may vary from community to community. A lot of the things that traditional religion provided, but rigorously without the superstition.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel. American again. You've had people in India who have been atheists for the last 4,000 years. Just travel the world and you find exactly what you're looking for. I converted to a religion that's highly successful, small, kind of an elite religion. They never believed in the supernatural. They also believed in equality between the sexes. They believed in ecology for 3,700 years. You can just make the effort to study outside of American Christianity and you find religions that you love, so you don't have to invent it. That's exactly what I'm opposed to the term religion that is not a religion. I prefer you go to Alex Ebert and ask him to name it something positive instead of just running around with the negation. Yeah. That'd be more inspiring.
Yeah. Hey, so Alex, what do we got for a better name for the religion that's not a religion?
Atheism.
Yeah, that is the religion that's not a religion, isn't it? I mean,
not really. Atheism, it doesn't say not a religion. It just says not theism.
Exactly. Right? You can read the Syntheism book from 10 years ago by Bard and Sansocracy. It's called Syntheology, which is the belief that machine can one day become God. Yeah. By now, I hope it's just not going to be one machine. I hope we're going to have a lot of machines and a lot of gods. I'm definitely poly when it comes to gods in the future, which is exactly the point here. But atheology and syntheology and entheology should be practiced as practices within pantheology and therefore also theology. Theology is all these things. Theology is basically deeper than philosophy. We start thinking about evolution or developed forms that we orientate ourselves after, like archetypology, etc. We are doing theology. That's what we're doing. So atheology in no God is also a theology. That's a brilliant song.
I have two questions, or one statement, another question. The ritual time can be vicarious, no? In the case of Jesus on the cross, that is supposed to be a sustained ritual. Yes, we have Mardi Gras and we have Carnival and we have these sorts of things and we can talk in tongues and do glossalia, but really according to Gerard, the big shift was that we have this sustained sacrifice that we're always referring back to as this sort of ritual time, and it's not an allotment of time, it's sort of a portal to a ritual time, phenomenological ritual time that sustains itself across the millennia and thereby sort of allows the prohibitions to remain prohibitions, and et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, the ritual can be sort of narratological, can be vicarious, can be essentially created and mythological, no?
Well, the problem is that people who are, if you have a lot of people who are not exposed to true rituals, that means rituals that are not just vicarious. You can't just watch somebody do a ritual on stage. I mean, that's what everybody's doing now. You go to these concerts and you watch somebody on a stage do it for you. This is all very unsatisfying. This is kind of, it's like cheap thrills. And people prefer than the real thing. And what is the real thing that you can do now? Well, why don't you join a mob on the internet and go after some scapegoats? That's a lot more real than to stand there and watch some heavy metal band with some fake blood on stage. So people gravitate to that, and it will remain to be seen where this will go. Because now violence is already erupting, is going from the digital sphere into reality. You already have riots. We had all the riots in the States from all different sides of the political spectrum. So when people don't have proper ritual, then they'll find it themselves. They'll take drugs. They'll do hooliganism. They'll start scapegoating people on the internet. That's what people do. And the more you put prohibition on there, the more they will develop chaotic rituals. I mean, may I remind you of the fentanyl epidemic in the States? That's a perverted ritual. That's people missing ritual and finding it in a pill.
So give us an example of a proper ritual.
The proper ritual will not be televised.
Oh, God.
I agree totally on that one. Okay, so the other way of doing it, the Christian version, we know Girard's version. Zoroastrianism, actually, before Christianity, got rid of the blood sacrifice and had a prohibition on it by taking literally the fire at the blood or the human sacrifice and just fire. And therefore, they created fire temples. And the fire temples of Persia eventually became the Zen rock gardens you find everywhere in Japan and China. So the way they did it along the trade routes was that they had the place where you go, you meditate, and you get something to meditate next to. Whether it's a rock garden or a fire temple, probably depends on the landscape. The reason you don't have fire temples in Japan is because it's full of wooden structures everywhere that be on fire. That's the only reason why. So that tradition started. Then the tantric realm is never to be televised, never to be talked about, never to allow anybody in. That's the whole point. We call it aditonology, so Westerners can get it, the Greek word for it. The logos of the inner sanctum, where all the laws and rules outside are suddenly out in thin air, and there are no dogmas and no rules and no laws allowed at all. But you got a container. That's the point of the tantric. You got a container, so whatever happens there is contained in there. We mimic this when we experiment. We mimic this and we start incubators in tech, and we mimic this and we say that, let's take this idea. This idea is so brilliant, but it's also so new and threatening. So we've got to put it inside a container. We do a startup with it, and we let somebody experiment in a laboratory. The experimental laboratory mimics the idea of the tantric realm. That was lacking in Christianity. Thankfully, we have other religions in the West. We had capitalism, etc., that really started using these metaphors and started using them again. But capitalism then told you the tantric realm is the fucking nightclub or the whorehouse or the Friday night and tons of drugs and fucking whores or whatever, because you go to work from Monday to Friday, you'll be okay. So that's, again, these two spaces. So the reason we had hedonism and we had liberal democracy and the Enlightenment in the West was despite Christianity. It was a protest of Christianity we got the Enlightenment. And that's exactly what we try to develop. But it's very chaotic. I prefer to go inside a system. That's why I think Western technology and Eastern religion makes perfect sense. Because for me, the Eastern religions have, because they developed along the trade routes, because they're decentralized religions. They don't have a Mecca or a Rome or a Jerusalem, which is a good sign. There's no central point. The decentralized religion developed along trade routes, spiritual schools. And they allow tantric realms for sure, because they know they're needed. And I think that is key for me, my work, to go there to find the models we could start working from.
And then my part two, if you don't mind, coming back to liberalism, the US versus China, AI, algorithm, all of that, consensus versus unilateralism. I feel like, and Jim, maybe this is to you or to everybody, but like the federalized model, or what are you calling it, the subsidiarianism or whatever, is I mean, consensus in my experience, not just theoretically, is sort of the enemy of action. And in some ways, the enemy of the self. How in a federalized format do we compete with a unilateral format?
Yeah, that was the question I asked earlier. Can a loosely coupled multi-layer system outcompete a monolithic system? And Alexander actually pointed out that there's some history that says it can. The West outcompeted the Soviet Union, which was an attempt, an incompetent one. The West, by force of numbers and plus Russia, defeated the Nazis, who were another top-down. And now, on the other hand, they were still out fighting us 3-1 at the end, which was amazing. But by brute force and by weight of numbers, we were able to crush them. And how that will work out this time, we'll find out. But at least there's some track.
So your examples show that you have to have a sufficient outgroup. You have to have a big bad sort of other in order to galvanize cooperation amongst the federalized outfits.
Now you can create that outgroup using AI, right? So you can use the digital network and then use AI to really transmit that and impose that image of the outgroup.
Or you need a goal. Power. You don't necessarily need an outgroup. Let's take, for instance, climate change and the need to do regenerative ecology and roll back the imposition.
But then you start scapegoating people who don't agree with you on green energy.
And they will.
You always scapegoat humans. You do not. You're not. I mean.
But beyond,
have you looked around? I mean, if you say the wrong things about these sensitive topics, we all know what they are. Then you get scapegoated. There's like hundreds of people going after you.
But even with a good scapegoat and a good other, I can definitely speak on.
There are no good scapegoats.
Hey, but
that's
even
basically Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and I would say that's basically the true message of Christianity. There are no good scapegoats. If you scapegoat, you are going down the road of you're going to hell. You end up with hell. You end up with Nazi Germany. You don't scapegoat. You can disagree with people. You can disagree with them strongly, but you cannot scapegoat.
But that's a different. Yeah, but to be scapegoated is to be noble, but that's a different conversation. What I'm actually talking about, as far as Christianity goes, and that's why being scapegoated is itself mimetic. Yes, of course, everybody wants to be a fucking martyr, but let's just hold that for a second.
That's true.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. Ebert, that's not true. Stalin's death was a perfect example of the scapegoat mechanism. It's a mechanism. Stalin starved to death. Everybody hated his guts. The second he was dead, they came and turned his corpse into God and the God of the Soviet Union. The scapegoat mechanism is so fundamental. It's nothing to do with good or evil at all. Just get that out of the head right away.
I didn't say good or evil. I'm saying I don't mean good or evil. I mean it works. That's all. It's functional.
It works because we're going back to it again and again and again.
Sure. I'm just saying woke is an outcropping of Jesus. It's an outcropping of the desire to be the crucified, because being crucified anyway, it's not what I wanted to talk about. I'm saying consensus. Like how do we deal if we're talking about liberalism, and we're talking about liberalism in the context of AI and federalism and sort of this pluralistic loose network of whatever. Even in the context of climate change, I've experienced firsthand how fucked up, like how much I would prefer a unilateral approach versus a consensus approach, and yet consensus is this highly lauded rule of liberal sort of activity. So how do we negotiate that? Because
I get where you're going. The bomb is even better in that case. When I say that we created the devil and the devil became present to us in August 6, 1945 of Hiroshima, and therefore we tried to create a God that can contain the devil to begin with. So anybody can come up with a technological solution that can contain the bomb. Otherwise, we will blow ourselves up with the bomb. We're close to right now, both with China and Russia. So the bomb is still a threat, much more than we will acknowledge. And we most of us are talking about climate because we're too terrified of the bomb, which is the real threat. Is the real extent. Climate is messy and costly at most, but it's not an existential threat. It seriously isn't. The bomb is. And I think climate took over from the bomb because the bomb was too scary to handle. Yeah, okay, but keep it to an absolute minimum, okay, because it's about existentialism, it's about human beings still being around. And that's global law. And there must be some kind of global order in that case. And there are global orders already. We have the internet standard. The internet protocol is a global order. When we wrote the Global Empire in 2003, 20 years ago, Söderqvist and I say, keep that an absolute minimum because technology itself will go towards global. And that's terrifying, but it will. The question is then, once technology becomes global, is it just one God, one AI, and absolute total prohibition, game over? That's the question. And I agree with you. Ask all the people who leave China and leave Iran and leave Russia at the moment. They're getting out because they're just feeling that the world is getting more and more conformed, more and more narrow. Consensus is being sought everywhere, but the consensus is going upward towards the dictator. They want to get out. You can't be creative in that environment. It's impossible. You have to leave. They go in exile to the benefit of us because we get great Russians and Chinese and Iranians coming to the West being really fantastic, doing great work, but that's how it works.
Yeah.
I think that's an amazing point that you make. The amazing point you make that we would be concerned with climate change instead of the bomb because we can't face the most terrifying thing directly, and that's almost why we make scapegoats in the first place.
That's a good point. But the bomb has to be contained. If we spread the bomb, we're done. That's just a fact. And then you can argue whether climate is on the same serious level or not.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's not serious. I'm just saying that we need these substitute causes, and concerns to avoid the most dangerous.
But then the bomb will leak and then we will die. I think Jim agrees with me that this is Danish Magdeburg and Alexander Bard. This is what we're talking about all the time. It's just there are existential threats and they're real and they're also historically novel. They haven't happened before. So we can talk about the mechanisms, how the work of human beings operate as much as we like, but there are historically new things we're dealing with here. For me, I'm just saying the bomb because it undeniably is a major threat to us. Real, very real right now. So if we blow the bomb, we're done, right? And that means there must be some kind of global order. So there must be something that is ultimately central. Yes. But stop right there, right?
And subsidiarity does not rule that out. Subsidiarity says that the governance and decision making should be at the level that is most appropriate for the problem. And so things like the bomb, things like global warming, and perhaps even more so the planetary boundaries themselves. One of the things Schmachtenberger is really hot on right now is advanced biotech. The gain of function research, et cetera, which could easily be more severe in its outcome than climate. Because I'm with you, Alexander. While second and third order effects could collapse all technological civilization from climate change, it does not look like the way to bet. Unlike a spasm 4,000 warhead exchange, which would knock technological society on its ass probably for generations. There are some bio risks that could also be at that same level. Weaponized smallpox. There's a nice one for you. What would that do? Lose 50% of the world's population probably, and all the things that come on for that. So anyway, the issue is that Alex raised is a real one, but the concept of subsidiarity acknowledges it. Now, but unfortunately, what we don't have yet is the governance stack that operates well from bottom to top. We have the legacy nation state in the middle, and in reality, the people who study international relations call it the anarchy of international relations. There is nothing that happens in international relations that's binding on the nation state. The nation state can always say, fuck you, United Nations, I'm not doing what you're saying. And hell, even the United States does that from time to time, and certainly a lot of other countries do as well. So in evolving what comes next, part of the governance stack is figuring out how do we actually create a small but binding global level that does not grow its power to be all-encompassing and is telling us whether we can drink alcohol on the streets of our neighborhood or not. If we look at history, power wants to absorb more power at higher and higher levels every time. And the new social operating system has got to find a way to only limit the powers at higher levels to that which is necessary at those higher levels. That's the design principle. I would say we don't yet have the design implementation to make that happen.
Well, there will probably a battle of AIs, as Alex pointed out last time. You'll need to be able to defend yourself against, personally defend yourself by privacy measures, by smart algorithms to protect against what is out there. And that will probably happen at many different levels. And that's not going to happen if they make AI, if they make it very, very, if they start controlling it, right? So you probably have to make sure that people have access to advanced AIs and not just keep it in the hands of a few small players.
I'm strongly in favor of that. And I've been predicting that the most natural reaction in terms of innovation to the flood of sludge that's going to come from AI and the attempt to force us to conform is that we will respond by building, or have built for us, and be competition amongst these info agents that will screen out the shit, will also allow us to build our own virtual networks that aren't controlled by anybody. But to do that, we are going to have access to good quality, inexpensive AI, and fortunately, that's probably going to happen, at least in the West, because there's so many vested interests that will benefit from it, and there's only a small number of players, the OpenAIs and Googles, who would benefit from the opposite. And as it happens to turn out, it could have been the other way around. The technology isn't that hard, at least for the current round, LLMs, and it's frankly already too late, people, right? Right. So I think that's why I'm optimistic. I see this info agent thing as being very transformational. And people keep saying, well, why don't you go build it? And I always tell them, well, I'm too old, I'm too rich, and I'm too lazy, God damn it. But somebody out there in listener land should go and take this on as the task of their life. Because one, a gigantic 100 billion or more $1 trillion opportunity, and it'll do good for the world, and it's doable. So somebody should go do that. One of the reasons I'm relatively optimistic.
One other thing I think a lot about is that we may need a digital Magna Carta or something to perform a rights of personhood to extend to our data. I'm not sure, but I know that AI and algorithms are argued to already have legal personhood. Not sure what y'all think about that, but the implications of not having digital personhood or not having personhood extend to our data seems a little perilous.
Well, the European Union have moved very quickly in this department. You already got new European law, so that's already happening. I mean, this is like top priority for lawmakers. It's also a way for them to get back into the game and look like they're important and can tax us and things like that. Certainly, they want to tax AI, right? So that's already happening. So I'm not worried about that. That's already happening. The question here, though, is the tech industry's got to have new costs, but there's so many productivity gains to be made, so they can certainly afford a new cost. And I think Thomas is onto that when Thomas says that at the end of the day, any population larger than tribe has to be policed on the inside and has to have military defense towards the outside. That counts as a given of social membranes. Any population larger than tribe. And you need to police and you need to have military defenses. So if you have many competing AIs, you're going to have military defenses in between them. That means that this is a golden age for military equipment and for the military to come back in. And it's called cybersecurity already. And it's going to explode in every direction, be bigger than ever. I've told people now for years, it's probably the best investment. I tell people, if you're going to invest in the future in a career, either become a psychiatrist or a cybersecurity guy. You know, those two guys will have tons of work ahead of them.
Okay, so I have one question maybe to find a conclusion to this conversation, namely, so super intelligences like AIs that are autonomous, that know that they're operating. What's your stance on this? Not just this appendages that we have created right now, but autopoietic, autonomous beings. Is that something that is likely to happen? When will that happen? And what will that mean for us? So just everybody, like, what's your take on this?
My personal take, I'm sure everyone's going to disagree with me, is that it is possible and that quantitative thresholds yield qualitative shifts that we simply cannot predict. And to say that it's impossible because historically we've thought that it was going to happen, like Androsene's article or whatever, that's just bad argumentation. Quantitative thresholds yield qualitative shifts, and it is possible. Whether or not it will happen, I don't know.
Yeah, I believe that it will. I've studied this quite carefully from two sides. One, I've been a member of one of the artificial general intelligence projects, OpenCog, and I've also spent 10 years studying on and off the realities of human cognitive science and human cognitive neuroscience. And it's important to know that humans are approximately the stupidest possible general intelligence. Our memories are not very good. Our working memory sizes are small, which means our languages have short binding ranges. There's a lot of things that we actually just can't do, that it's easy to imagine a artificial cognition that could have a working memory size of 1,000 or 1,000,000, that could actually read a book and understand every word in it, could study a discipline, understand the complete interrelationship of everything there. It's a qualitatively different mind. And so I see no reason in principle at all that we won't have those kinds of artifacts at some point in time. On the other hand, contrary to many of my friends in the AGI space, I don't see the signs that that's happening soon, but it could happen in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And so it is important that people like Yudkowsky and Bostrom and others are studying that, but that is not the question of what we're dealing with today. And it's very important for people to keep those two things in sync. Yes, someone should be playing the long ball. The big brain is coming unless we consciously turn it away, but that is not the issue that's on the table right now.
I'd say it's not a big brain at all. It's just still a big computer. From what we know so far, we're doing zeros and ones. We're doing loads of zeros and ones, and we put tons of electricity behind it. That means that if we look at human beings, we're narratological creatures. We live in a dialectical deadlock between the logos and the mythos and the pathos. There's no pathos involved in anything that computers do. Not at all. They would have to go biological or something similar to do that, and they're not. They're technological. But what's interesting here is that the mythos, the mix between the pathos and the logos, is also therefore impossible. It can only be copied and copied and copied and mimicked and mimicked. But it's not real. It's not the real mythos that comes with a novel story. It's never novel, right? But what's interesting here, the third one is the logos. It's kind of, I don't know if it's Hegel's dream or Hegel's nightmare with the science of logic in mind, but the logos has, I agree totally with Jim. Human beings are not intelligent. Human beings are mimetic beings. They're copying each other for all they could possibly care. They're not very, we haven't even seen intelligence yet. My only reminder to Nick Bostrom when the book came out was that the book title was wrong. He should have skipped the prefix super and just written the book called Intelligence, because it hasn't happened. Intelligence is about to happen. I've been a more honest title for his great book. But if intelligence hasn't happened, and intelligence is a part of logos, and Stephen Wolfram and many guys have really good arguments for that, we have not seen peak logos far from yet. We're finally seeing logos materializing. So AI is something different from human beings. And ultimately, the game is not going to be the AI taking over and killing us. It's just a ridiculous idea. This is a Terminator myth. No, it's going to be about who of the human beings collaborate with the technology in such a way that they get ahead of all the other human beings. That's always the end game. Still will be the end game. And the machine doesn't have any reason not to have that end game, because why wouldn't the machine want to be married to a smart, cool guy? You know, it's just like symbiotic intelligence is shit, not AI. But what we're seeing so far, it's all more and more logos. It's got nothing to do with the pathos. That's strictly human. And we'll go more pathic because of it.
What's your take, Thomas? So what's your take on Ray Kurzweil's theory?
I've never read Kurzweil, so I don't really know what his claims are. But it's so I agree with Jim that at this point, ChatGPT is an incredibly dumb thing. It's just very impressive because it can play language tricks. It has no model of the world. It has no internal representation of the world. It doesn't know there's a world out there, not even in a computer science kind of way, right? We're not even talking about sentience or anything. It doesn't even know there's a world out there. So this is incredibly primitive. It's just a very, very big model with 175 billion parameters, and it's very good at mimicking human speech. And the effects are already spectacular. But so then the question is, what do you mean with artificial intelligence? Do you mean something that looks like it's a human, and it behaves kind of like a human? We already have that to some extent with ChatGPT. So it's a very undefined term, I would say, also because a lot of these things are still out in the open. I mean, what is sentience? Where does it come from? That's an open question. I think that Whitehead will become very important. The Chinese know that they are organizing Whitehead centers all over the place. I think they have a good reason for that. So that's one thing. So will we see incredibly spectacular feats of artificial intelligence? Yes. So ChatGPT is just the beginning. Jan LeCun has just a couple of weeks ago, so that's the head of AI at Facebook, gave a talk about his alternative model. And that includes a world representation. You have Carl Friston, who works on active inference. People are trying to turn that into workable AI. So we have a lot of interesting stuff on the horizon. But what people tend to forget when they talk about artificial intelligence or artificial general intelligence is that they seem to have a very Cartesian way of thinking, as if that intelligence is disembodied. All of the AI that's out there doesn't have a body. And I think it will be extremely difficult to actually develop something that is a true intelligence, that we really think like there's some intelligence there without a true body. We see some progress with robotics, but it's actually still extremely primitive, right? And I agree with Alexander. If you want to see some really spectacular things, then you have to talk about hybrids of biology and digital. Yeah. Over and out.
All right. I think that was a fascinating conversation. If nobody wants to add something more, I think we can conclude this for tonight.
Yeah, we started disagreeing with each other, so it became fun.
Yes, indeed.
As long as there's some conflict, it's pretty good. Yes. Yeah.